Folks, I know this might disappoint/delight some of you to hear your favorite/least favorite wrestling YouTuber say something like this, but folks, I am suffering from CM Punk fatigue. Truthfully, beyond that initial shock of his return at Survivor Series, I really couldn't care less what happens to him going forth. But not that I don't like him, I like him, I'm just tired of him. You know, I hope he does well, I hope he stays healthy and all that, but beyond that, I have just run out of the capacity to care about him for a while. I'm just so sick of all the drama and the think pieces and the takes and the reports and the rumors we have heard about this guy from the last decade plus. I hate the fact that no matter what you say about this guy, people come from all over, out of the woodwork. It brings out the crazy in everybody, not just the ones who like him, but the ones who hate him as well. It all just feeds into the same tribal bullshit that I've been so over with in the wrestling fandom, this whole problem that I think he himself has been a large part in causing. So now I sit here dreading the fact I do this video for all the backlash I'm gonna get, putting myself through all this grief about someone I'm just so done with. Why am I doing this?
I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to make money.
Oh, wow. Those early numbers are looking really good. Oh, shit. Once more for old time's sake, I guess. Chick magnet Punk has spent the majority of his career as somewhat of a folk hero. One of the biggest stars of the indie scene in the early 2000s, Punk's abilities in the ring and on the microphone earned him a rabid and loyal fan base with a reputation for rubbing people in power the wrong way. But for the better part of 20 years, Punk has been buoyed and propelled by this fan base in large part because of that reputation. To give you an idea of his popularity during his peak, he was the face of the anti-WWE movement while he was still in WWE. In January of 2014, broken down, fed up, and feeling mistreated, Punk famously walked out of the company following that year's Royal Rumble, before being officially fired on his wedding day months later. That Thanksgiving weekend, he gave an interview on his then-friend Colt Cabana's podcast where he explained in scathing detail all the problems he had with WWE, which, in case you need a refresher, featured some quotes like this.
That place should be fucking happiest place to work, and they use that as like this bizarre mindfuck. WWE doesn't do anything to protect the wrestlers. They do things to protect themselves. I'll go work at Starbucks. You know what I mean? They'll probably actually give me insurance. They Z-pack me to death so much that in December I shit my pants on a SmackDown. Me and him in a room together, never any good vibes. Always negative. The way he would always look sideways at me, the way he always treated me, but there's no working relationship, and there never will be ever again.
Let's put a pin in that one for later. Matter of fact, several pins. To some fans, he was the answer to everything, the magic bullet who would eventually save wrestling when the business needed him most. People would hijack WWE shows for years by chanting his name. Folks fantasy booked his return with a rabid fervor. It even led to the creation of this little meme. Though he was out of the wrestling limelight, it was obvious there was still a huge demand for the straight-edge superstar. After 7 long years, fans got the answer to their prayers when CM Punk debuted in AEW, establishing the company as a true threat to WWE, with the Second City Saints sitting proudly atop the tank barrel, leading the charge against his sworn enemy. But before long, a crack in the foundation soon escalated into a seismic shift, and in a period that lasted less time than Roman Reigns' run as undisputed Universal Champion, the CM Punk AEW relationship crumbled into dust, and eventually gave us this never thought I'd see this in a million years moment.
I'm home.
So, what happened? It's a story of backbiting, politics, and revenge. But enough about my Thanksgiving holiday. Heyo! It's an episode I never expected to tackle this soon, but I gotta talk about it now. Here's the whole sordid story of CM Punk in All Elite Wrestling. When AEW debuted in early 2019, many fans thought the new national company was a perfect fit for Punk's return to wrestling. First of all, their very existence was seen by some as disrespectful toward WWE for some reason, and Punk was all about that at the time. Their inaugural All Out event that August took place in Chicago, a city synonymous with the Punkster. His appearance at StarCast that same weekend certainly added fuel to the speculative fire, but ultimately nothing came of it. That isn't to say feelers weren't sent out, though. Punk did say in an interview prior to StarCast that he was actually recruited to AEW by the Young Bucks via text, which he said annoyed him and delayed his entry into the company. Y'all like foreshadowing in your stories, right? In fact, Punk's first televised wrestling-related appearance post-walkout wasn't even with AEW, but rather with WWE, or rather a WWE-adjacent program on Fox Sports.
Just when they think they got the answers, I change the culture.
Punk surprised lots of folks when he debuted as a recurring analyst on WWE Backstage that November. Working under a Fox contract and not a WWE one, it allowed Punk the ability to dip his toe back into the waters of mainstream wrestling, though gave a lot of caveats when it came to a possible in-ring return.
I've lived an experienced life where I know to not say no. That's going to be a bridge that is going to have to be built, and it might take as long as building the Great Wall of China, because there's some hurdles. There's some hurdles there.
In wrestling, 10 years can feel like 2,500, so I get it. His return to the WWE bubble was short-lived. Backstage was put on hold and then canceled thanks to the COVID pandemic in 2020. But for Punk, that brief return would be an appetizer for what was to come. On August 20th, 2021, CM Punk stepped foot in a wrestling ring for a major company for the first time in 7 years, debuting for All Elite Wrestling in Chicago on their second episode of Rampage. Punk apparently made the decision to join after seeing how the company handled the sudden passing of Brody Lee, as well as witnessing what he called at the time a positive locker room environment, which is already about the 15th irony we've come across in this video. And on his first night on the job, Punk didn't waste any time on the mic.
And I was never going to get healthy physically, mentally, spiritually, or emotionally, staying in the same place that got me sick in the first place. August 13th, 2005, I left professional wrestling. August 20th, 2021, I'm back.
It was one of the most cathartic moments for wrestling fans in recent memory. More than 15,000 fans screaming and crying as Cult of Personality blasted over the speakers at the United Center. CM Punk soaking in the ovation before making his way to the ring to deliver his opening address. He talked about how his passion for wrestling had previously been stomped out, though never mentioning WWE by name. He talked of helping the younger talent. He invoked the spirit of Ring of Honor. And then to wrap it all up, he finally made good on a promise he first made 10 years earlier.
So on your way out of the United Center tonight, grab yourself a free ice cream bar on me.
Seriously, what's not to love about all this? Ice cream, for God's sake! No matter people's opinion on the company, there was no doubt that Punk's arrival was an immediate success for AEW. His entrance and debut promo were the most watched clips in company history. Sales of his new t-shirt crashed the Pro Wrestling Tees website. Viewership for Dynamite stayed above 1 million people for their longest consecutive run. And perhaps most notable of all, CM Punk's return to wrestling arguably pushed that year's All Out event in Hoffman Estates to the highest buy rate the company has ever done up to this point. Certainly, Punk's walkout in his podcast interview back in 2014 did a lot to build his legend over that 7-year period. Fans waited a long time to see him put his words to action and come back to the ring, and now fans' curiosities were finally being sated. Punk got his wish to work with young talent in the form of Darby Allin at that show. Not only was it his in-ring debut with the company, it was also the first time we got to see the Long Boys. Seriously, underrated look for him. Despite not having wrestled in 7 years, Punk proved he could still hang with the kids in a great match with Darbs. He got the Duke over the scrappy underdog, all while making him look good in defeat. Things were off to a good enough start, but then AEW kicked things into overdrive at the end of the show, with the double debut of Adam Cole and Bryan Danielson. It was a watershed moment for the company. It's widely considered the best show AEW has ever done. With the combined star power of AEW's newest recruits, along with the rest of what was a very stacked roster, it really sent a message to the wrestling world. For the first time, it truly felt like anything could happen in the battle between WWE and AEW. But soon after that, things began to get a little real.
Yes, I interrupted the great CM Punk! Oh no! Oh God!
On an episode of Rampage, Punk and Eddie Kingston got into a war of words, drawing heavily from their shared past in the Indies and lots of unresolved heat from Kingston. For the first time in what felt like ever, it seemed as if the ghosts of Punk's past were in a position to take a shot, but of course, he had his own ammunition.
I came to that locker room for brotherhood, and all you did was judge me. Because why? I was fat? I didn't become friends with the booker? I didn't bury other people to get my own stuff in? So I was wrong? No, you were wrong.
I am not wrong for seeing greatness in you 15 years ago, but I damn sure am a fool for trying to hold you to that standard and expect greatness because you're a bum.
This isn't helping anyone. Dr. Shelby? It was one of the first times people really began to question whether or not things were copacetic after Punk's arrival. Sure, lots of people have come out in the last year or so to share their positive Punk moments, but Kingston has been very outspoken about his real-life detest for CM, so this felt like he was getting some aggression out. It would be wrong to take Kingston literally in this promo when he said that nobody wanted Punk in the locker room, but statistically speaking, there had to be a few. Regardless of their heat, both past and present, the two had a great brawl at Full Gear in November that saw Punk come out on top. The crowd was split for this, but that seemed more out of respect to Eddie than any ill will toward Punk. So far, Punk was 2 for 2 in terms of interesting programs. His match with Darby Allin showed his desire to work with a younger talent, while his match with Kingston dealt with his legacy as a legend of the Indies. But his next storyline was a game changer.
This is no longer CM Punk. This is PG Punk.
Maxwell Jacob Friedman, or MJF, was the top guy fans loved to hate. By this point, he had bested nearly everyone he had competed with, from Cody Rhodes to Jungle Boy, Darby Allin, and Chris Jericho, and from the moment Punk first walked out on stage in August, fans had been salivating for a program between two of AEW's most gifted mic men.
Your whole entire career on the stick, you've been big fish, small pond, and standing across from me, you're just a freaking minnow.
He's just a less famous Miz.
It sure is great to be back here in insert name of town.
If you think the grass is so green around the other side, be my guest. Go ahead, leave. Main event night 4 of a buy one, get one free extravaganza, and then get released faster than you last in the sack.
Like a couple of MJF's earlier feuds, he had Punk go through a gauntlet of challenges to earn the right to face him. After Punk beat Wardlow, Shawn Spears, and FTR, the two had their first match on Dynamite. Friedman used old-fashioned chicanery to hand Punk his first defeat in AEW, but then things would take a dark, twisted turn.
January 2014, you leave me when I needed you most, when I believed in you. That's when I realized if the best in the world couldn't do it, why could some dumb, 5'0" ADD-riddled Jew boy?
In an attempt to get a laugh out of the audience and a rise out of his opponent, Punk shared a photo from years earlier when he signed an autograph for a young Max Friedman. But instead of acting embarrassed about it, MJF basically explained his origin story, how he grew up idolizing Punk in WWE only to feel betrayed when he walked out. It was a trauma that would lead him to become a verbal assassin of Punk's own caliber, an evil that Punk himself had a hand in creating. But it was Max's delivery, the pain on his face as he recounted his difficult childhood and how Punk was his hero who let him down, that took things to a whole new level.
Is it true? Is that real?
But the devil had used his tears to lure Punk into his trap, later assaulting his former hero in a scene violent enough to make Jon Moxley blush. The feud peaked with a brutal dog collar match at Revolution in March of 2022. It was old school in every way, from the storytelling to the sheer amount of blood in this thing. Despite the mess in the ring, the feud wrapped in as tidy a fashion as possible. Wardlow finally turned his back on his old employer MJF, allowing Punk to give Max a taste of his own medicine to pick up the win. It was hands down his best feud during his time in AEW, and dare I say, one of the better programs in company history. At the post-show press conference, everything seemed right in the world. Punk was happy, Tony Khan was happy, everyone was happy.
I will not be defending this championship against you. No, for the first time in my life, I will be defending all elite wrestling from you.
Then came Punk's feud with Hangman Page over the AEW Championship. Things moved forward the way a face versus face matchup typically does, but on the go-home Dynamite before Double or Nothing, a seemingly innocuous comment by Page rankled the challenger.
You talk a big game about workers' rights, yeah? Well, you've shown the exact opposite since you've gotten here.
Oh my God, this right here is where things begin to get so stupid. Time for a quick sidebar. Hangman's unscripted comment about workers' rights all came from the apparent belief held by company EVPs Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks that Punk used his pull to have Colt Cabana removed from AEW prior to his arrival. See, with Colt Cabana, oh crap, I just realized I gotta explain all that now. I gotta do a sidebar within a sidebar. Oh, why am I doing this? Oh, another 1,000 views already. Thank you. The heat between Punk and Cabana stemmed from the long and arduous legal ordeal WWE put them through after Punk went scorched earth on Colt's podcast, which in turn led to a separate long and arduous legal ordeal between the two wrestlers that led to their falling out. I'm not going to get into the gritty details of what went down between them. There's a great Reddit post out there that does a better job explaining it, far better than I ever could, and I'll link that in the description. The point is, Colt Cabana was taken off of AEW TV and moved to ROH soon before Punk debuted, and some people began making connections and assumed that Punk was responsible for that. Therefore, Hangman making a crack about workers' rights. Based on Punk's immediate reaction, he seemed surprised and perhaps hurt about some of the language Page was using, though it's unlikely anyone outside of a select few thought anything of it at the time. Then to compound the issue, Punk considered Hangman to be a little stiff in their title match at the pay-per-view. I'll take Punk's word for it, but for me as a viewer, I thought it looked fine as long as Punk wasn't trying to steal Page's finisher. When the final bell rang, it was CM Punk who left as AEW champion, officially taking his place as the centerpiece of the company, still riding high on good ratings and attendance trends. So at the moment, at least as far as the public was concerned, things were still relatively cool in Elitesville. But all too soon came the next big crack. Literally. On the following episode of Dynamite, less than a week after he won the title, CM Punk broke his foot doing a crowd dive before a six-man tag match with FTR. It was just about the worst luck and the worst timing imaginable, considering how long fans had waited to see him back on top in wrestling. But at least instead of vacating the title as is tradition, Punk simply took time off to heal while the company crowned an interim champion in Jon Moxley. 2 months later, Punk returned to Dynamite, and though his foot may have healed up, the chip on his shoulder was back with a vengeance.
Hangman Adam Page, you want that rematch? You got it right here, right now. Let's go.
Punk had a date with Moxley at All Out to unify the two world titles, but before addressing him right away, Punk decided to go off script in his own right, calling out Hangman Page despite the fact that the two weren't in any kind of storyline together. When Page naturally failed to show up, Punk finally had his chance to shoot back.
That's not cowboy shit, that's coward shit. A little bit of advice, and I suggest you take. The apology must be as loud and as public as the disrespect.
My guy, what the hell are you doing? You already beat him! For the belt! Punk's line was a direct response to Hangman's comments in their last face-to-face, but again, it's worth pointing out, most fans didn't have a freaking clue about any of that drama at the time. All this did was hurt Hangman, who wasn't in a position to improv an angle out of thin air. Compare that to what Hangman said to Punk when most people didn't get the subtext and moved on, and it feels a bit excessive. But all of it deeply unnecessary. And this point right here may be one of the first times where you and I disagree on things here. I do think Page was out of line in initiating that thing publicly, and he should have been reprimanded, but I also think that Punk's retort months after the fact was way more petty and way more harsh. And yes, I agree, someone should have stepped in to prevent this from happening at all. Thank you for pointing that out. Mox and Punk couldn't wait until All Out to settle the score, so the unification match happened on an episode of Dynamite in Cleveland 2 weeks earlier. And in one of the most shocking moments in AEW history, Moxley beat Punk clean in 3 minutes.
It's over! It's over! My God, it's over!
The scuttlebutt was that they had the two matches, once on Dynamite and again at All Out, because Moxley allegedly refused to job to Punk if they only had one match. Who knows, but either way, it seemed as if Moxley was not so subtly siding with the Elite in the build-up to the rematch.
Fragile ego, fragile body, weak mind, weak spirit.
At least some of those words were proven true on that September night at the Now Arena. Though Punk won the match and got his title back in his hometown, he suffered another unfortunate injury, tearing his tricep during the bout. The show ended with MJF making a surprise return after his own lengthy absence, unmasking as the Devil and becoming the new top contender to Punk's championship. The epic rubber match between these two hated rivals was officially in motion. But before we get to all that, hey, CM Punk, congratulations on your match tonight, champ. Any words for the press?
Why I'm a grown-ass adult man and I decide not to be friends with somebody is nobody else's fucking business. And the fact that I have to sit up here because we have irresponsible people who call themselves EVPs and couldn't fucking manage a target, and they spread lies and bullshit. Empty-headed fucking dumb fuck like Hangman Adam Page. He shares a bank account with his mother. It tells you all you need to know about what kind of character that is. I'm hurt and I'm old and I'm fucking tired and I work with fucking children.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up question. It sure is a bummer the Acclaimed didn't win the tag belts tonight. Your thoughts? By this point, Punk was understandably at the end of his wits. Already mad at a lot of people in power and now injured to boot, Punk used the Scrum as a sounding board for all of his frustrations in his first year in the company. First blasting the wrestling journalism community and the elite in equal measure before specifically zeroing in on Hangman Page and the Bucks. All stemming from Punk's belief that the elite were feeding stories to wrestling reporters claiming he was responsible for Colt Cabana being cut from AEW. Tony, pal, feel free to jump in during his rant at any time. By all means, please step in and address the Colt Cabana rumors right now so everyone can just shut the hell up and get back to work.
And I just want to make it clear again, Nick.
It's not his position to make it very fucking clear.
I should have just taken a head on like I did with Blake and Forbes recently.
We're all learning here, Tony. It's okay.
Thanks.
What happened? You once looked so happy.
And I will still walk up and down this hallway and say, if you have a fucking problem with me, take it up with me. Let's fucking go.
Advice that Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks evidently took to heart. After Punk's portion of the Scrum had ended, the Elite and AEW's head of legal went to Punk's dressing room to discuss his comments. Within moments, a legitimate fight broke out between Punk, the Bucks, and Omega, and several agents were all involved as well. What's known is that Punk threw the first punch, but the details after that are all a little murky. Nick Jackson took a chair to the eye, and Kenny Omega suffered a bite mark on his arm courtesy of Punk's friend Ace Steel. But perhaps the biggest victim of all was the innocence of Punk's dog, Larry. Naturally, there was a metric shit ton of fallout from what will live forever in wrestling infamy as Brawl Out. The Bucks, Omega, and the agents involved were all suspended for months. It's unclear if CM Punk was suspended as well, but he was already hurt, so it's whatever. The men were stripped of their newly won trios and world titles respectively. Ace Steel was fired outright. It was a massive PR blow to AEW, a moment that severely hampered the goodwill the company had spent a long time building. It derailed several interesting storylines and completely overshadowed what had been a darn good pay-per-view, which is something I'll be saying again to the effect of sometime later in this story. The Bucks and Kenny came back that November for Full Gear, while Punk remained on the shelf healing from injury. The Elite were evidently under a gag order that forbade them from discussing Brawl Out, but that didn't seem to stop them from making cheeky references to it in their matches for the next month. But I mean, can you blame them? So much meat on that bone. Seriously though, great behavior for some executive vice presidents, I guess. While the Elite had their fun, CM Punk was also adding more gasoline to the fire by appearing backstage at a WWE Raw event in April of 2023. He met several members of the roster along with Triple H before Vince McMahon, who was working remotely, advised Punk to leave to avoid any contract tampering concerns. Was Punk simply wanting to make amends for past transgressions, or was he sending a message to his current employer? Despite rumors that Brawl Out would spell the end of Punk's AEW career, things did pick back up once he healed from injury. Warner Bros. Discovery gave AEW another 2-hour time slot on Saturday nights, and so Collision was born, a show that would basically serve as Punk's personal playground. He would be the centerpiece of the show, get a second contract as a creative force on it, and he got to pick and choose which wrestlers he wanted there, which pretty much meant anyone but the Elite and most of their associates. I get why Punk was frustrated during this time. All this time had passed and there was still no attempts to squash the beef between these two sides. What was stopping Tony Khan from sitting all these kids down and telling them to play nice, all while pointing to a graph showing their ever-increasing bank accounts? Do you think Vince McMahon and Triple H would ever kowtow to such pressure from their stars this way? Sure, Brett, we'll put you on Superstars and Sean can only be on Monday Night Raw. We good? Punk returned to AEW on the premiere of Collision on June 17th, 2023, back once again in Chicago. Hey, Tony Khan, come here. Come here, Tony. Yeah. Triple H, yes, you, both of you. Come here. Yeah, come here. Come here. Come here. You know that other cities like this guy too, right? He faced one of his oldest rivals in Samoa Joe in his big return match, but before that, he felt like sharing a few words and opening a few old wounds.
You can call me whatever you want. You know what David Zaslav calls me?
Boo! Fuck that guy! Boo! Wait a minute. Is that not the reaction you wanted us to have for that name?
One Bill Phil. That's because I am the one true, genuine article in a business full of counterfeit bucks.
You know what? I'm just going to sit back and I'm going to watch this ship hit the berg, baby. Punk was also seen carrying a bag to the ring, the contents of which most were able to guess was the AEW World title he never lost. Punk revealed the belt, spray-painted an X on the center plate, and declared himself the real World Champion, a title he apparently intended to defend exclusively on Collision. For all the comparisons Punk gets with Bret Hart, who would have guessed that one of his last big creative moves was actually a double homage to Ric Flair and Hollywood Hogan? From the jump, Collision made strides to differentiate itself from Dynamite and Rampage, in presentation, in the roster, in the style of matches, and so on. Punk himself resumed his quest to work with younger talent on the show, putting Ricky Starks over in the finals of the second ever Owen Hart tournament. In fact, he actually lost more matches during this part of his run than he ever did in the first, though all but one of them were in tag matches where someone else took the fall. And even though viewership dropped a lot from week 1 to week 2, it did hold steady for a while after that, and the format was enjoyed by those who watched it. CM even wrestled and defeated Satoshi Kojima at the second ever Forbidden Door, which has been considered one of the better pay-per-views of the year. But all the while, Punk continued to poke the bear with the microphone, as he did in his return promo. In an off-air moment after an episode of Collision wrapped up, Punk made a joke about Hangman Page's action figures not selling and calling him a peg warmer. Punk reportedly apologized to Hangman later via text, but what was that again about the apology needing to be as public as the disrespect? Phil, do you remember the domino effect that took place the last time you took a shot at Page? And that was when you actually had grounds to do it. Hangman didn't say shit this time. For the next several months, it felt like this, Punk continuing to stoke the flames while the Elite remained silent, once they got their sillies out months earlier, that is to say. Meanwhile, reports kept coming out like a slow drip, alleging Punk had banned this person or that person, and the Bucks thought this about Punk, a living journal of the tension fermenting in the locker room, as all these news updates usually came from either the Elite camp or the Punk camp. Jesus, at this point, I'd almost rather watch Camp WWE. But history was on the horizon as AEW was hurtling toward their first overseas event at Wembley Stadium in London. And as the date got closer, there was still so much beef between Punk and the Elite that even Otis himself couldn't have handled it all. Apparently, Punk wanted to bury the hatchet and capitalize on the Brawl Out intrigue, but the Elite apparently refused. Tony Khan apparently offered a meeting between the two groups before leaving for London, which Punk apparently agreed to, but the Elite apparently refused because they wanted Punk to be on good behavior for 6 months before meeting, and he broke the rules with his naughty return promos. By the way, who offers a meeting like this? They're all under contract to you, TK. You make the meeting. Hell, even the EVPs have to answer to you, right? Things were already at an impasse between the two sides, and as AEW was desperate to build a bridge between CM Punk and the Elite, their trip to London would be the final straw to send that bridge falling down. Huh? That was okay, right? No? Oh, God. Y'all are brutal, man. You come up with something better then. The first hiccup happened the moment Punk arrived in London, when he had to take a public subway to get to Wembley because AEW failed to provide transportation for him. Look, Ring of Honor doing that to Marty Scurll was one thing, and actually kind of funnier in hindsight, but good lord, this is CM Punk we're talking about here. Then the show began. Anywhere between 72 to 85,000 people attended the historic event, depending on who you asked, and overall the show was everything you could have wanted in terms of action. But once again, it wasn't the show people were talking about afterward.
Real glass! Crushing the abdomen. Go cry me a river.
Time for another sidebar. As I mentioned earlier, when Punk came back and became the foundation for Collision, he also had producer duties as well. Weeks before All In, Punk had shot down an angle involving Jack Perry, where he'd be thrown through the real glass of a rental car and be written off for a few weeks so he could take a planned vacation. Evidently, Perry got the okay from the company to do the spot on Collision, but that being Punk's show, he ultimately vetoed it out of safety concerns and to avoid blood and all that stuff. Also, dude, just take a pile driver or something if you want to be written off for a while. What the fuck? According to reports, Perry believed he was shot down by Punk because of his friendship with the Young Bucks and was frustrated because of that belief. Fast forward to the pre-show of All In, where Jack and Hook faced off in a street fight. Perry apparently got the go-ahead to do the spot in the match after all, which brings us back here.
Real glass!
No doubt meant to be a direct shot at Punk after the day he already had the real world champion had had enough. Brawl Out was so passé. Brawl In was in. According to the reports that are out there, Perry returned backstage after his match, and a face-off between Punk and Perry quickly turned physical when Punk struck Jack. The altercation ended with Punk lunging at Tony Khan, who was a witness to all of this, allegedly shouting that he had quit, moments before walking out to face Samoa Joe in the official opener. He's nothing if not efficient. When Brawl Out had happened, many people criticized Tony Khan for not doing enough to prevent something like that from happening again. So after Wembley, he finally dropped the hammer.
Today I had to make one of the toughest decisions of my professional career. Today I terminated Phil Brooks, CM Punk, for cause.
As we all now know, AEW conducted an investigation into the incident, which not only had multiple witnesses, but was also caught on video. And after consulting with a disciplinary committee that included AEW's head of legal counsel, an outside attorney, and Bryan Danielson, Tony Khan fired Punk for cause on September 2nd, 2023.
Never in all that time have I ever felt, until last Sunday, that my security, my safety, my life was in danger at a wrestling show.
Damn, dude, if you feared for your life in London but had the balls to announce Punk's firing in Chicago, then whatever Punk did must have been fucking nuts. Now, when this recent wrinkle about Danielson being part of the disciplinary committee came up, a lot of people were in an uproar about that sort of thing. Wrestlers shouldn't have that kind of power, they say, about a business featuring luminaries like Triple H, Dusty Rhodes, Eddie Gilbert, Jeff Jarrett, Jerry Lawler, Vern Gagne, The Sheik, Bill Watts, and countless others. There's a conflict of interest, they say, about a man who was apparently picked for the role specifically due to his objectivity. Danielson fired Punk, they say, not understanding what a committee is or does. It doesn't seem all that outrageous to me. I mean, there are plenty of examples of committees like this in workplaces outside of wrestling that do have peers involved in the process. It's all part of representation, and who better to represent the locker room than somebody whose presence there is considered nigh unimpeachable? And yeah, wrestling should have an HR department, but guess what? They don't. And by the way, the EVPs were in no position to touch this either. And here's what it all comes down to in that regard, folks. Either Bryan Danielson cold-heartedly stabbed his longtime friend in the back and is now mad with power and an agent of the Young Bucks and their diabolical wishes, or CM Punk started 2 fights in less than a year with his co-workers, one of which directly in front of his boss, and Danielson made the difficult decision that his longtime friend had to go for the good of the locker room. Yes, I agree Sammy Guevara should have got fired for the same bullshit, and yes, all of this fucking sucks. I was rooting for Punk to succeed in AEW like so many others were. I've always respected how hard he fought to get what he was after in wrestling, and I understood how important he was to wrestling and to AEW in general. And let's not pretend otherwise. Punk was good for AEW business. He helped boost pay-per-view buy rates before he first got hurt, his shirts were top sellers on AEW's shop, and overall attendance was helped by his presence. And though I would argue that his hiatus and then his firing didn't seem to affect Dynamite viewership that much, his loss was definitely felt on Collision. The fact that Punk avoided getting cut after All Out to me is a minor miracle, but let's be honest, the moment he dropped that counterfeit Bucks line in his return promo, there was no way there was going to be any peace. I don't blame Punk for lashing out after feeling disrespected and unheard. I don't blame him for fighting the media for reporting on what he considered malicious rumors and attacks on his character. And since no one on the elite side seems to suffer any sort of punishment for their verbal antics, why should he be worried about being punished for his? The moment I lose sympathy for Punk, though, is when he starts throwing hands, not once, but twice. Wrestling is not the same now as it was 20 or 30 or more years ago when men were men and they fought all the time in the locker room and that's how we liked it. But it doesn't fly like that anymore, no matter how much shit you have to put up with. You tell me what's a more fireable offense, some snide comment from a coworker or the other coworker punching him out for it? Oh, but don't worry, there's plenty of blame to go around. First of all, if it's true the elite were responsible for the rumors that ultimately drove CM Punk to violence on more than one occasion, and if they got it wrong, then they are truly irresponsible fools of the First Division who may or may not be allergic to money. And it boggles my mind that while all this was happening, Tony Khan seemed to do the bare minimum to quell the genuine tension between arguably his biggest name and the highest-ranking wrestler executives and their friends. The very least he could have done was tell them to keep the insider comments to their fucking selves. AEW AEW basically allowed a civil war to break out within its own roster and its own fan base over Punk. And they couldn't even try to cash in on it because some people didn't want to do business. Now, not every backstage altercation needs to become an angle. If that were the case, Sin Cara would have been booked like a stud in WWE. But if there was one way to turn AEW's fortunes around after a PR debacle like Brawl Out, it would have been a best of 7 with the Elite and CMFTR, not the Death Triangle, no offense to them. The fact that we couldn't get at least that was a massive missed opportunity, and that Tony couldn't tell everyone to get their shit together for the good of the company and their own careers is a huge mark on his legacy, for now at least. But now hell is frozen over and that Great Wall of China has been built after Punk returned to WWE in shocking fashion at this year's Survivor Series. AEW's loss is now potentially WWE's gain, as Punk has returned to the place he once said made him physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally sick. It was a return that even I had my doubts about, but if Bret Hart could come back after Montreal, I guess it stands to reason that this impossible thing would one day become possible. That being said, CM is coming into WWE with a lot of extra scrutiny. Everyone says he's changed from 10 years ago, and sure, I guess, but Wembley happened 3 months ago. Even if WWE is a better run organization than AEW, emotions can and will still exist, and who's to say Punk won't get into another fit if things don't go his way?
The grass is not greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you water it.
Is the grass truly greener for Punk? Will he get the gilded treatment that he and his fans have always felt he deserved? Will his mouth come into contact with any blood money covered body parts in Saudi Arabia? Time will tell, but I genuinely hope he does well for himself and has a nice, fulfilling run. But realistically, I give it 9 months. CM Punk's arrival to AEW seemed to bring about a new era in wrestling. Not only did it resurrect the career of one of our generation's most popular wrestlers and open up a whole new world of dream matches, it looked as if WWE would finally have a legitimate contender after 2 decades on top. But amidst all the drama that AEW couldn't contain or redirect into something positive, WWE somehow got its act together and the sleeping giant awoke. Now the company routinely sells out 10,000-seat arenas, while AEW's back to where they were before Punk ever arrived, celebrated with a victory lap by the Bucks in a half-empty United Center after Punk's firing. No matter what you think of Punk, and I'm sure many of you will make those thoughts known in the comments section, anyone who truly supports AEW, or really wrestling in general, had to have hoped for a better outcome. And even though it was a bad look for the company, one has to hope that Tony Khan can learn from his mistakes. Hopefully he can harden the line between friend and boss and not have to wait until the last minute again to assert his authority as the man in charge, because he may not get another chance. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Please don't make me regret having done it by giving it a thumbs up, share the video, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, hit that bell icon for all the notifications. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.